For St. Patrick's Day, I decided to do a quick little gouache painting of a magical shamrock. To be honest, I had originally intended for my next gouache painting to be one of my own original characters from my upcoming book series, but I'm honestly kind of nervous about painting him just because I feel like it has to be perfect, especially since I was thinking of using that painting as the book cover. But maybe if I convince myself to do several different paintings of him, that will take some of the pressure off, and then I could choose whichever one turns out the best. I might just have to go with that strategy to get myself to actually start painting it. And I apologize in advance for the video shots where you can see my hair and the top of my head in the corner. Your girl needs to have her face close to the art to see it properly. I will be experimenting with different filming angles for future videos though. Anyways, on to the topic of today's video. 3 tips for beginner artists and 3 tips for overcoming imposter syndrome. And those two often kind of go hand in hand, so I thought it would be fitting to have 3 of each. Tip number 1, practice for an hour or 2 every single week. It takes time and practice to develop any skill, and drawing is no exception. I would highly recommend practicing by drawing from a reference photo and doing your absolute best to get your drawing as close to the picture as possible, without tracing it, of course. In my experience, I found that drawing one animal or flower was great for this, not overly complicated, and you can focus on a single subject at a time. Draw the general shapes first before adding details, to save yourself the grief of having to erase that perfectly drawn eye once you realize it's not quite in the right spot. Does it sound like I'm speaking from experience? I certainly am. I have made this exact mistake too many times to count, but I did eventually get the hang of it, and you totally can too. Once you're nearly done with your sketch, look at it again through your phone camera to see if you can spot any differences between your drawing and the reference picture. No phone? No problem. Turn both your art and the reference upside down and do the exact same thing, picking out and fixing at least 3 differences. It might sound silly, but looking at your work from a different perspective allows your mind to see it in a new light and help you see where you may have made some mistakes. After all, when you look at the same thing for hours on end, you tend to become blind to its faults. The same is true when writing or editing a book. Finding flaws from a different perspective and fixing them will help you rapidly improve your own work. Tip number 2, draw from reference pictures, as mentioned in the previous tip. This is the fastest way I know to improve your skills, because that is how I improved mine. It helps to draw a variety of different subjects and styles, but the most important part is that you are actively looking at your work with a critical eye to find where the proportions are off so you can fix them. After all, if you keep drawing the same flower the exact same way, without adding or changing anything, both the flower and your skills will stay the same. One of my favorite quotes, or sayings I suppose, is that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. So let's not be insane. Tip number 3. When painting, have light highlights, medium tones, and dark shadows to make your work pop. Making sure you have 3 distinct tones really helps your work look polished, whether you're drawing a flat cartoon or a hyper-realistic portrait. Miss any one of these three, and the drawing will fall flat. For example, in this painting I am working on, the greens are my medium tones, the dark green and black are my shadows, and the blues, yellows, and whites are my highlights. You can especially see how this work really starts to pop once I get the darkest tones in there, as it helps define the shamrock and the foreground, making them distinct and three-dimensional. Alright, and here are my 3 tips for overcoming imposter syndrome, which I think pretty much everyone struggles with at some point. Tip number 1. Understand that in order to become good at something, you must first be willing to be bad at it. In other words, you must be an apprentice before you can become the master. This may seem obvious, but plenty of people are afraid to share their work or even begin their art journey simply because they are afraid of seeming foolish or looking bad in front of others. This was less of a problem when we were children, because at that point everyone was still learning. But as we grew up, self-consciousness might rear its ugly head. But everyone has to start somewhere. It is an essential part of the process. Literally the most important step. After all, a journey of 1,000 steps begins with the very first one. Tip number 2. Whether your artwork is simple and cute or highly realistic and detailed, there is an appreciative audience for it. It may take some time to find, but it will be worth the effort. And while it can be good to help develop your own artistic style by copying the style and artwork of others, it is important to keep in mind that you cannot copy exactly what the other artist has done. You can certainly take inspiration in specific ways that they have drawn something or positioned their characters, for example. But you need to take that inspiration and incorporate it into your own work instead of just doing exactly what they have done, because doing that will inhibit your own growth. Tip number 3. No one else has it all figured out either. We're all just figuring things out as we go along. So try not to overthink things or compare yourself and your progress to others. Comparison is the thief of joy, and the only person with whom you are competing is the person you were yesterday. I do really hope you found these tips helpful. They're things I've come up with after well over a decade of drawing, painting, sculpting, you name it. So hopefully they can help you on your own journey as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Until then, happy painting!